questions people have, and we've got line reception. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about the project while we're just setting up? We'll have some time at the end as well if people want to talk through stuff. I think the last week or so was a lot of groups understanding what they had to do, understanding the requirements a bit better. But is there any questions that people want to bring up? We'll have a few minutes. Yep.
Is that provided?
It is for your services. So you might have a service that says, here's this endpoint to, I don't know, upload a file or something that contains, you know, like for Yahoo Finance or something. And you have to provide a token with that to authenticate you, right? So not just anyone can use the service, you have to be authorized and authenticated. Rather than your service implementing the auth itself and having like a register route and a login route and all that kind of stuff, you just make calls to the API, the authentication API. So someone who wants to use your service first makes a call to the auth API. They get a token, they bring it back, they call your API calls the auth, says, is this token valid? So it's just a black box that you can use to handle the authentication.
We don't need if we don't.
I should be able to join internally now. Yeah, this link.
Sorry. Oh yeah, that would be a problem.
Yeah.
Let me just change that.
You can send me a guest.
What I want. The other option is you send me the slides, and actually I've got the slides on here, haven't I?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it that way.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll save us a bit bother. So I will share screen.
And you need.
Which one's there?
This one.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll do that.
Okay, I think now I've got everything working. All right, thanks everyone for coming today. This is Dan Johnson, who's here from New Relic. He'll introduce himself properly, but he's a senior lead instructor. He goes around and teaches companies how to use New Relic, and this, I believe, is the first of his coming to universities and presenting to students. That's really exciting for them. Really exciting for us to have him here today. Thanks very much for your time. And over to you. Let's hear about observability.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Glad that we finally got everything sorted out. Always takes longer than you think. Yeah. So guys, just a little bit about me before I start on New Relic and what New Relic's all about. So I've been in IT for over 20 years. I started out in infrastructure. In the very beginning, I was doing sysadmin and network admin work. Started teaching back in 2007, I think. And I came on board as a Linux trainer. And then I started teaching VMware, taught VMware for 8 years, taught Cisco for 5 years, moved to ServiceNow space, and taught the ServiceNow platform for 4 years. And in the last 4 years, some of that stuff was in parallel, by the way, if those numbers don't add up, right? And then the last 4 years, I've been training for New Relic. So New Relic is an organization that's been around since 2008. Back in the early days, we were all about application performance monitoring. So I think some of you guys probably have a little bit of familiarity with what APM is about. It is part of what we do at New Relic, but by no means everything that we do. So just wanted to talk a little bit about our platform, what it actually offers, talking about what we call full stack observability, right? And what that actually means and sort of how it can help you guys as sort of upcoming software engineers, just understanding how things work. So that number is, yeah, it's a pretty big number up on screen. It's just really just to highlight that we've been around for quite a long time, and we ingest a very large amount of telemetry data. Now, when I talk about telemetry data, I'm talking about data that's coming from underlying infrastructure, right? So it could come from servers, virtual machines, containers, serverless functions, or it could come from your apps directly, right? Or it could even come from things like the customer's browser or the customer's application. Right? So if you've written an app, put the app on the App Store, you want to know how people are using the app. That's kind of part of, one small part of what we actually do. So let's start off just separating out the concept of monitoring versus the concept of observability. Okay, so don't know if you guys know anything about the two concepts, but observability is a relatively new concept in IT space. I mean, it's not actually that new. It's been around for a long time, but it's actually been focused on only recently. Okay, whereas monitoring's been around forever, right? I mean, we call these things monitors, right? Because they help us monitor the underlying system. So we've been monitoring things for a really, really long period of time. But the reason why we're making that shift and we're going from monitoring things is kind of important, but what's way more important is understanding how everything all works together. When you had more simplistic systems, monolith type architecture, you got one application, it's doing everything, and I mean, where's your problem going to be? Your problem's going to be inside that app, right? So now you need to change one thing, you got to take the whole app down, right? So we wanted to re-architect that and make it a little bit easier, which we did. It's a lot easier to make changes because we've now, instead of having this one big app, say, if I broke that up into 20 different components, right, which is all the different things the app does, well, that's really cool because if I need to make an update to one of those components, it doesn't affect the other 19. However, it's a lot harder to find problems, right? Because now you've got 20 apps. They all work in concert. They all work together in order to be able to solve these problems. So observability is really understanding the monitoring that comes from all of your different applications and your underlying infrastructure and your front end in order to get a clear, full picture of what's actually going on. Right, so from a monitoring standpoint, there's a number of different methodologies. And the different methodologies are used for different things, right? So for example, red method, been around for a long time, right? Rate, errors, and duration. This is something that's quite application centric, right? So when you're monitoring an app, you want to know what its throughput's like. You want to know how fast it is, right? So it's your duration or your latency. and you want to know if it's generating errors. If you're living in another layer in the stack, for example, if you're down on the infra layer, probably not so focused on red. You're really more looking at things from a use perspective, right? You're more interested in the utilization of your resource. So we've got application-centric monitoring, red. We've got resource-centric monitoring, which is use, right? What's my utilization of my underlying infrastructure? Is my infrastructure saturated, right? Are there errors, that I can detect, right? The most recent one that you can see on the list there is 4 golden signals. So this was developed by Google just only 3-4 years ago, I think it was. And it's kind of a combination between rate errors and duration with saturation, kind of a little bit like that. But Google published Site Reliability Engineering Handbook. In that handbook, you guys can get it online, it's free, right? Chapter 6 of that book talks about monitoring, and they basically say, if you're going to monitor 4 things, you should monitor these 4 things, right? Which is latency, traffic, errors, and saturation, right? They say these are the most important, right? In terms of determining whether your systems are functioning correctly. There are more than that as well. I mean, there's one that I can think of, which is very focused to the front end, which is something called the Core Web Vitals, right? And that looks at your performance as perceived by the front end. Okay, you develop an app needs to be consumed, right? How are we going to access it? What's the performance like from the customer's perspective? Do you know, or are you just looking at things from your own application? Because I can have an app, and maybe my app, I can measure it and it's got 50 millisecond response time, and that seems great to me, right? And then if I was measuring it from the browser, somebody accesses my app, maybe it's taking 5 or 6 seconds for them to load the page. That's terrible from the browser perspective, even though my application might be quick, right? So this is where it's very important to get the different perspectives, right? So yeah, from an observability point of view, if you guys look up observability online, they will talk about 3 pillars of observability, right? You'll see I mentioned metrics, logs, traces, right? These things are, these things are important. You need to get your metrics, get your logs, get your traces in order. Well, at New Relic, we talk about 4 because the other 3 are all in some way or another derived from the 4th one, right? Which is events, right? So metrics are really just aggregated events, right? Think of an event is, there's never a really good clear definition of event. It's just really a thing that happened, right? So it could be somebody just navigates to a page, right? That's an event, right? That's a page view event, right? Maybe they click a button, right? They log in, they buy something. Any interaction, each thing is an event. Now, that essentially becomes the foundation of your telemetry data. Once you start asking different questions, like, well, how many people clicked on that login button in the last hour, right? You're taking the events and you're turning them into a single metric. You're saying, we had this many login requests in the last hour, right? But it's derived from, so you've got the events themselves, we capture the events, and we derive other understandings from them. So that's why they focus on the 3, because the 3 are really derivatives. We've derived some level of observability from the underlying events that we're capturing. So logs, obviously the information that surrounds the events, right? What was going on at the time, and traces. Traces are actually linking multiple events together, right? And especially as we move towards a micro architecture, traces are more and more important now, because if you make a request to a URL, chances are your request is not going to be served by a single app in the back. So you can't just go, well, I went here, I just need to look at this one thing to find all my solutions. that request might get distributed between 10 or 20 different systems, and they all interact and ultimately come back with a response. So a trace will tell you that particular request, you know, that you made at whatever, I don't even know time, yeah, 12:23 p.m., right? That request actually went through these 6 systems, right, and came back and responded within, what, 1.2 seconds, right? So that's sort of some of the differences between the kinds of data that you'll be able to see. Looking at it another way, I'll come back to that. Looking at it another way, something simple like me going from my office to the airport, right? You can look at this from a metric point of view, an event, a log, or a trace. And you can see with each perspective, you're going to get different insights, right? So the metric might be along the lines of, well, what's the average time it takes me to go from the office to the airport? So how much time should I leave, right? Event is always looking at a specific instance. How long did it take me last time? Describe what happened. So show me the logs, right? And which particular route did you take on that occasion? So we do this in real life. We ask these kind of questions when we want to know different specifics. So why not do it with our telemetry data as well? So we do it with our telemetry data also. All right. So I'll come back here for a second. So here to talk to you guys about observability, but I'd argue that observability is not actually what we want. It's what we need. We do have to have it because of the fact that in software today, we are moving faster than we've ever moved before. So if you were in software 15, 20 years ago, how often do you have to update your apps? Right? Firstly, you probably have to do it manually, right? You have to download something and install the package. Right? Most of the time it's done automatically in the background, and it's happening very frequently now. We usually don't even notice. But back then, the updates were very few and far between, right? So you don't really change a product that often. Maybe it's a once a year release cycle. Right? It starts to become faster, becomes once every 6 months. Now we've got organizations that will do tens, dozens, or hundreds of production level changes per day, right? Now, how do you do that? You need to have better visibility into your environment, right? And that's why I give you this analogy. It's actually very, very accurate to what we do because it's all about speed, right? It's speed to market with new features, right? But it's also speed to find the solution to problems, right? Why is that thing not performing well? We don't want to take 2 weeks to work that out. We want to be able to sort that thing out within an hour. Why is this thing erroring out? We want to be able to resolve that as quickly as possible. So when you think about it, it's all about working with our software faster and faster than we've ever done in the past. So the car, that's the organization, and then you need to have sensors, right? In racing, you would do that, right? You would put sensors all through your car so that you can get as much info from it as possible, right? So that's where, from a New Relic point of view, we would install agents, right? So we have all different kinds of telemetry agents that allow us to capture very, very specific sets of data. And then all that data goes back to the New Relic platform, which in this analogy is the pit wall, right? And all that sensor data gets interpreted into things that make a lot more sense to us, like how are we doing in the race, rather than, okay, my brakes are at 120 degrees, right? We're monitoring it and it's good and we know that, but is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? We got to look at the context of the whole situation. Okay, so the safety part of it, that's again It's apparent in software as well, because yeah, we want to be able to release new features very quickly, but we don't want that to cause instability in our environment. So yeah, we want to be able to move as fast as we can, as safely as we can, right? Yeah, just a couple of little examples here between metrics versus events. Some sort of real examples where, so at the bottom you can see these are all metrics, right? So you take raw events from your telemetry and you ask specific questions like what's the maximum number, what's the minimum, sum them all up, give me an average. You're ending up with a metric value at the end. If you're going to look at the actual data that comes in, when you're looking at events, you're going to see you'll see all the details, right? So over here we can see we got 2 transaction requests for the same thing, right? By 2 different users. I can see the 2 different users. I can see how long each individual transaction took, right? Kind of useful for being able to, diagnose very specific errors, right? For example, you'll want to know, like, I'll want to see the exact error, right? And I might even want to see all the logs surrounding that error. So it's one of the things that we do in New Relic is we will provide logs in context of the things that you are looking at in the platform. So if you're looking at an error, you don't want to see all your logs. You just want to see, just show me the logs for that error. You press the log button and it will show you just those lines, right? If you're looking at a pod or you're looking at a container or a host or anything, you can just say, show me the logs for that one specific thing, right? In order to help you get to the root cause of whatever it is you're looking for as fast as possible. So when you're looking at things from a metric point of view, you can see we've got a count, we've got an average, right? I can't go back the other way, right? I can't go from a metric and extrapolate the events. I can't get the events back out, but you can always aggregate. All right. Telemetry data is a little bit different to user data and company data, just a different concept. We don't keep telemetry data forever. You saw that first slide with that really big number, but we ingest a lot, but it doesn't all get kept for all time, right? There's no value beyond a certain point, right, in retaining your telemetry data. So having said that, events are useful in the here and now and the very recent past, whereas your metrics retain value for a longer period of time. You want to know your averages over a period of time. Whereas, for example, you're probably not going to be diagnosing an error that occurred 9 months ago. So you don't need the high detail on the error event from that long back. So yeah, you probably all heard of the data lake analogy. Well, from a telemetry data point of view, we look at things from more of a river perspective. And the value in telemetry data is that it flows and that it's not stagnant, right? So just thinking about it in that way, when you start sending telemetry data to New Relic, it's not about retention, it's about that constant flow of data going through. All right. I had a better slide for this. So just talking a little bit about the platform, this is some of the things, or this is actually most of the stuff that the New Relic platform does. Okay, so if we start over on the left side, we've got APM, is our application performance monitoring, right? Now, talk about full stack observability, yeah? So full stack, break it up into 3 layers. You got your user experience layer, okay? Then you got your application layer. Then you've got your resource layer, or your infrastructure layer. That's really how everything breaks down, okay? So APM works in that middle layer, right? So we have 8 different language agents that we collect data from your application directly, right? So you'll actually, the agent actually sits right alongside the application code. And the data that you're going to get is going to be things like the transactions that your app is doing, right? What transactions is it doing? How long are those transactions taking? And then you can even go into the transaction and you can break it down into the different methods and functions, right? So if you've written an app and the app does something, but for whatever reason, it seems to you like it's taking too long, you want to, I wonder why it takes so long. I don't know. Well, one of the things that APM does is it tells you which parts of your code are running slowly, so that you know exactly where you need to go in order to optimize it and speed it up, right? So yeah, so there's eight languages there. There's Ruby, Python, PHP, Node, Java, .NET, C, and Go. Yeah, they're the languages that are supported. And then there's dozens of frameworks around those as well. Infrastructure, right? Your apps need to run on something. I know you're saying, oh, but they run in the cloud. They don't run on anything. They just run. But they run on something, right? Everything runs on something, right? There's always a resource layer. You may or may not have access to it, right? But if you've got access to your resource layer, you might want to know how it's performing. And so we have infrastructure. Part of infrastructure is what you see next door, which is Kubernetes with Pixie, but these are your resources. What am I going to see? I'm going to see things like how much memory I've got available, right? I'm going to see how much CPU I'm using. I'm going to see my storage. I'm going to see my networking, resource related stuff, right? So different to the perspective I get at the app layer, right? What are my timings on my methods and functions? How is my code slow versus how are my resources looking, right? But it's helpful to see the two. I mean, maybe my code is running slow because I don't have enough resources. That's a possibility, right? Kubernetes with Pixie, again, it's just, you know, it's part of the infrastructure layer, right? So yes, we have, you can instrument a Kubernetes cluster and you pull in all the relevant information with regards to, you know, the pods running in that particular cluster, right? We can ingest logs from the application layer and also from the infrastructure layer, right? And we will present those to you in the context of the entity that you're looking at, right? So if you're looking at a host, yeah, here's the logs for that host. If you're looking at error, here's the logs for that error. Here's the logs just for this particular pod in that Kubernetes cluster that you're looking at, right? Without you having to search for it. We got some stuff here. You see mobile, browser, synthetics. We got some that way, other way, that way, up, yeah. 4 things, 4, the other way. I broke it. There we go. All right. Cool. Where was I? User experience. Right. Yeah. So you take the time, you develop a mobile app, right? Do a lot of work on it, and then what do? You send it out into the world, right? You publish it on the Play Store or the App Store, yeah? And then you just go, all right, it's probably good. Just leave it, right? Or you can instrument the thing and you can find out exactly what its utilization is like, right? So you do this for mobile, you can also do it for browser as well, right? So you can actually have, we put an agent inside the actual browser itself, so that when someone goes to a URL, right, they load the page and the first thing it loads is that New Relic agent, which takes all the timings from that event, that page load and the page interactions. Yes?
Obviously, New Relic's like software or whatever. How's that?
Okay. So question came through with regards to the collection of data and securing it. Yeah. In summary, yeah. So what we do out of the box, our agents don't collect any personally identifiable information, right? So if you talk about things, that's why I was sort of saying when we talk about APM, right? We collect things like all of the timings with regards to, your methods and your functions. It's mainly about the timings of things rather than collecting very, very specific data. Now, for example, what we do in line with that, say for example, somebody clicks a button on a site that is then going to run a query, right? Because they want to find they want to find the best restaurant or something. I don't know. So they search for something, right? We will collect the query, the constructed query, but we will not collect the search parameter, right? So we'll say, okay, this was the query that was run, but specifically the thing that the customer searched for in that transaction doesn't get sent. Right? So if they were going to perhaps leak personal information, right? Maybe they're looking up their own record on some site. Look this thing up, their name, their tax file number or whatever. We would get the query that goes to New Relic, but when you search for that name, there'll be no name there. It just gets put as a question mark, right? And the number that you search, that'll be a question mark as well. So.
What about like analytics as well? For example, like if you guys look at this, okay, that specific query is being used a lot, not necessarily the specific information, but the fact that it's used a lot. Other companies can maybe look at that and go, this company, this query is used often, or for example, like maybe an Instagram picture is used often. A different company wants to kind of replicate that. Understand that.
So are you asking, does the info that goes to New Relic, is that visible by other organizations? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. Short answer is no, it's not. So what happens is when your data gets sent to New Relic, it all goes into its own separate telemetry account, right? So only the users that have been assigned to that specific telemetry account have any access to the data that goes in there, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah, good questions, thanks. Where was I? Going back to the UX layer, right? So we can collect what the actual end user experience is like. So not just looking at it from our own perspective, our own apps, we think they're performing really well. Well, they might be from our perspective, but what's the real world telling us about how these things are performing? And also things like, do we really know what actual browsers our customers are using, or do we just assume everybody uses Chrome, right? Do we know what pages are most popular on our site, right? Or do we just put the effort into these few the most because, they mean the most to us, right? So it's the real world data. Now, next to that, we've got synthetics, right? The name should give something away to you. It's not real world data, it is synthetic, right? Synthetics is actually all about maintaining functionality, right? So you aim synthetics at a URL because you want to look at that URL and make sure it's doing all the things that it is supposed to do. So essentially, you write a script. You can do it in a codeless fashion now, right? We've just got this this step builder that lets you easily create scripts for it, all right? And whatever that URL is meant to do, you hit it, run those particular steps just to make sure that actually, yes, it is doing all the things that it's supposed to do. and it'll come back and it'll tell you success, right? So this is part of the thing where we want to be able to release code more quickly without breaking stuff. Things like synthetics really helps that, because push through a change and bang, one of your synthetic monitors stops working. A few minutes after that, you've been ongoing, constantly testing all of your functionality. So it becomes very apparent when something breaks, right? And you don't have to wait for the customer to go, hey, I'm clicking this button and it doesn't work anymore, right? Can you please look at it? Your synthetic check's been failing for a while. So that should automatically tell you some functionality is broken, right? Last one there, well, last two, network goes back to infrastructure, right? So yeah, part of our resource layer, yes, we can monitor networking devices as well, can capture SNMP data and NetFlow data, put that together with all your other resource related information. And the last point there, the ML model is machine learning. One of the things that we do in the New Relic platform is we constantly looking at all of the telemetry data that you're sending that's coming through. And what the system will do is it will highlight anomalous data, things that don't look normal compared to what you have been doing. So in other words, let's say you've got an application and you instrumented it a little while ago, and it has, it's not very busy. Maybe it has 100 requests every minute or something, but it's pretty consistent. It just does what it does. And then all of a sudden, it drops off to nothing, right? That will come up as an I don't like that word. I have trouble saying it. Anomaly, an anomaly, right? It comes up as an anomaly, right? Same thing if you all of a sudden had a huge spike in traffic. Response time looks really different, error rate changed a lot. So even if you didn't necessarily define alerts on the things in your environment, the system's still going to talk to you and say, hey, just so you know, this looks different. Not sure if you're aware of that. We're going to highlight it to you as an anomaly. There is, of course, alerting as well. It's it's a big part of the platform, and you can define any alerts that you want on any entity, and we'll do standard notification, right? Send it to Slack, send it to PagerDuty, ServiceNow, or any webhook that you want, right? So yeah.
Obviously, observability. What kind of work do you add 1 second 10-minute project? Add 1 second average service. After that. Is there much focus, or is it just?
So question, all right. So a question came through, just in case you didn't hear it, regards to the focus on performance, and I think you're really more talking about what would be a diagnostic process, I guess, we're talking about in terms of something like, imagine if there's a long-running transaction and you could maybe knock 1 second off that. It's not really going to make much difference versus a transaction that might only take 2 seconds and you can knock a second off that, right? You'll see a very big difference, right?
Also, they're much more, like, does the monitor, or is it observability tool? Do you want to integrate it across your whole stack?
Okay, yeah, so it's an overhead related question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd be lying to say if there's no overhead at all. I mean, it's a bit like, your race cars, right? And you put sensors in there and they do weigh something, right? But you'd never run the car with no sensors, right? You're going to end up going more slowly, right? So we typically will cite around 2%, 2 to 3% in terms of resource utilization. But having said that, it can vary a little bit. It really kind of depends on, it changes based on the infrastructure, also changes based on the app. and the framework and things as well. So it can change, but all things running well, you're looking at probably around about 2%, right? So I guess really more to answer that, I think if you were finding that the resource utilization was going above 3 or 4%, that would be a problem in itself. You'd want to go back and go, okay, well, what have we done wrong here? It's using up too much resource, right? So yeah, you'd be going for that sort of 2 to 3% range. Yeah. 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 Okay. Cool. Yeah. All right. The last thing I'll talk about, or actually two more things I'll talk about with regards to just the platform itself, what we can do with it. So far, I've been talking about New Relic agents, right? So yes, we have the language agents, we have underlying infrastructure agents, right? We have browser and mobile agents, right? Do you need to install them all? No, not if you don't want full stack observability. If you just want to see your app, then just install the app agent. If you just want to see how your underlying host is performing, then just install the infra agent. But if you want to see how everything works in concert, you would need to install all of it. Now, having said that, if you found yourself in an environment where it was partially instrumented, right? So maybe there was already some open telemetry agents already installed. We don't need you to re-instrument. We can take that telemetry data, okay? So anything that adheres to OTel standards can be ingested by New Relic. So it doesn't have to just be a New Relic agent directly. So that's what we're talking about down there. Any of the industry standards, we take data coming from those without you needing to modify it. Also, there's another side to the platform itself, which I haven't talked about at all. And it's the fact that the platform is in itself programmable, okay? So we give you tons of tools out of the box for you to be able to get full observability in your whole environment. But if there's something that you want to specifically do with your telemetry data, which we haven't thought of and hasn't been done before, if you or someone you know has skills in React, right, you can write your own React application on top of the New Relic platform and consume your own telemetry data in ways that we haven't thought up, right? You've got direct access. So you're already sending the data to us. So it's sitting there in New Relic database, accessible by you. You want to devise a new way of consuming it, you're more than welcome to do that, right? So yeah, it's sort of helps to future-proof you a little bit as well, in that something maybe that you haven't thought of in the past is and it becomes a possibility in the future. You can always write something around that. Skip over that. You guys are going to get this slide deck too, as well. So you'll have it for reference. I don't want to go through everything here. This is talking about all the different. All right. What I can do now is I can log in and show the platform for a bit of a look around. Just grab